Good morning. Thank you for joining us for Chicago Loop Alliance's Downtown Future Series. I'm Dave Broz, Principal at Gensler Design and a member of the Chicago Loop Alliance's Board of Directors. Welcome. Whether you know the Chicago Loop Alliance through your membership or through attending one of our public events like Activate, we're pleased to host you at our virtual Downtown Future Series Discovery Session. The Chicago Loop Alliance is a membership-based business organization that represents Chicago's Loop neighborhood. Our mission is to create, manage, promote positive, inclusive programs that attract people to the Loop and accelerate economic recovery. Today's session, Designing Cities for Mental Health, is the second event in our 6th year of hosting the Downtown Future Series. Over that time, we have had dozens of experts from all corners of the city and across the globe, and thousands of attendees just like you to be part of these future-looking discovery sessions together. Throughout 2021, we'll explore how downtowns around the world can not only recover from COVID-19 pandemic, but rebuild stronger and better than ever before. I would like to take a moment to thank our sponsor. Because of each of you and the power of these conversations that we've been having together for the past 6 years, this session of the Downtown Future Series is presented by Springboard, the leading provider of data and intelligence on customer activity. Springboard works with malls, property owners, downtowns, and industry associations across the world, including State Street. We'd like to thank Springboard for their support of this year's Downtown Future Series. Today's topic is more real for more people, as we have all had some significant stresses over the past year. As the world opens back up, there's a reckoning to come as we welcome people back to the new normal of life post-pandemic. Our cities play an important role in this, and today we'll discuss ways to design cities for mental health and well-being, and why that's so important. The restrictions faced by city residents around the world during the COVID-19 pandemic brought home just how much urban design can affect mental health. City dwellers with poor pedestrian or cycling infrastructure, limited access to parks or plazas, or no nearby public spaces for human connection suffered in isolation. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, anxiety was 3 times more prevalent in 2020 than 2019, and depression was 4 times more prevalent. How might a city design with mental well-being in mind prevent such sharp declines in mental health during the next crisis? How can we impact Chicago planning with this in mind? With us today, professionals in environmental psychology, landscape architecture, and environmental restoration and conservation will discuss how to seize the opportunity presented to us by the coronavirus pandemic to prioritize mental health and urban design from this point forward. Please help me welcome Jennifer Rowe, Director of the Center for Design and Health at the University of Virginia, and Margaret Frisbie, Executive Director of the Friends of the Chicago River. Thank you both for being here today. We'll hear from each panelist briefly before we open up to a group discussion. To submit a question, use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen at any point. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible. And if you have any technical questions or problems, please feel free to use the Q&A as well, and our staff will reach out to you. So without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce our first panelist, an environmental psychologist and former head of landscape architecture for an international architectural practice. Jenny Rowe has written extensively on the impact of the environment on health and well-being. She has over 15 years of experience in the use of restorative environments to build healthier urban societies, including a vital role for urban parks and green space. She quite literally wrote the book on the topic, Restorative Cities, Urban Design for Mental Health and Well-being, which will be out in August. Jenny, welcome. And then Jenny, you're muted.
Hello, everybody. Good morning.
There you go.
Thank you so much to the Chicago Loop Alliance for this invitation. I'm talking today about a subject that I feel really passionate about. The COVID-19 pandemic has underlined the importance of public open space for health in terms of strategies that reduce the risk of infection and allow people to safely connect with one another. For example, we have wider pedestrian paths in some of our cities now that allow for safe social distancing, pop-up cycle lanes that increase opportunities for mobility and increased use of park infrastructure. However, Pre-pandemic, urban design strategies for health have been almost entirely driven by physical health motives in order to reduce the risk of chronic health conditions, for example, obesity. We now have a new scenario. Every day we open the newspaper, we see some of the tsunami of mental health issues that COVID has released. But also, COVID has allowed us to talk more openly about mental health because we've all suffered emotionally and socially. And we need to capitalize on this opportunity. And I argue in the new book, we need to accelerate urban design for mental health. Next slide, please. Restorative cities is a new concept that places mental health, wellness, and quality of life at the forefront of city planning. There are 7 pillars illustrated here, which I will talk about very briefly this morning. The key point about the book is it's evidence-based. It builds off scientific, robust evidence and thousands of studies in restorative environment research, which show how certain settings, particularly nature settings, foster psychological well-being and mental health. Next slide, please. Next slide. The first of these attributes is what's called the green city. Can we go back to the previous slide? Back. Thank you. The first of these attributes, and the most robustly evidenced restorative attribute of city exposure, is to natural environments, the green city. Green in our cities reduces depression and stress and improves our cognitive capacity. It helps manage a whole range of symptom severities in relation to anxiety disorders, schizophrenia, ADHD, and dementia. The impact of green space on mental health is modified both by the amount of green space, accessibility to it, the type of green space, the view of nature from our window, its perceived quality, its biodiversity, and how it is used and how regularly it's used, and the amount of exposure, or what we call dose in my field. COVID-19 has shed light on the inequalities in people's access to and experience of green space, and we desperately need more investment in poorer communities to address this health inequity. Next slide, please. This is just an extract from the book, from the Green City chapter. Each chapter has the same format. It sets out the mechanisms by which a restorative attribute delivers its benefits. We spell out the evidence mental health benefits, including the social benefits, and we offer up design guidelines, both at a neighbourhood and at a city scale. But I would stress this is not a rule book. We're providing guidelines for architects, urban designers, planners to interpret flexibly. Next slide, please. The second attribute of the restorative city is the blue city. Now, Margaret's going to be talking very shortly about the Chicago River and its benefits. Water in a city is possibly the most restorative attribute of any city. We call it blue space in my world, and the mental health benefits to access to blue space are the same as for green space, that include a reduced risk of depression and stress alleviation, but it's less well evidenced. So what's so special about water? Well, it offers increased opportunity for fascination and curiosity, for touch, for interaction, the play of water over surface textures, how it interacts with light, is a dynamic attribute, and this is what makes it more restorative. In Chicago, you are very well placed in terms of capitalizing on urban water for mental health, but there is a danger of gentrification. We know waterfronts command high real estate prices, so equitable access to urban water is critical. Next slide, please. The third attribute of the restorative city is a sensory city. Again, we have scientific evidence demonstrating how the senses can be harnessed within urban design to exert positive impacts on mental health. Some of these attributes include reducing unpleasant noise and designing positive soundscapes and sonic refuges, bird sanctuaries, for instance, harnessing positive smells, which in turn harness feelings of place identity and belongingness, increasing visual complexity may hold one key to reducing depression and suicide. This slide shows an interactive lighting design for a bridge in Londonderry, Northern Ireland. The light can be manipulated using your smartphone. This increases cognitive engagement. It causes aesthetic distraction when the light changes, and it's significantly reducing suicide from the bridge you see. Next slide, please. The fourth attribute is the neighbourly city. We address in the book how we can use urban design to build strong social networks. People with supportive social relationships are less likely to develop mental health problems and more likely to recover from them quickly. So some important attributes include bumping places, those impromptu encounters we have at the market, at the coffee shop, the dog park, and in mixed-use walkable neighbourhoods with fine-grained shop fronts that encourage dwelling in place. Housing needs to be designed appropriately to promote social interaction and networks across all ages, mixed incomes, and all ethnicities. Parks, community gardens, urban farming opportunities that are tailored towards cultural needs, as you see here in this slide, facilitate social interaction and foster belonging, altruism, and increase trust in a neighbourhood. Next slide, please. Next slide. The fifth attribute is, can we go back to the active city? Thank you. The fifth attribute. An active city integrates physical activity into everyday urban life and enables mobility for all citizens. But physical health is interrelated to mental, social, and cognitive well-being, and whole health active living strategies are needed. The mental health benefits of being physical in our cities include a reduced risk of depression and anxiety, improved stress regulation, improved brain health and memory functioning, which all plays a significant role, particularly in healthy aging and healthy child development. Here you see some of the characteristics of an active city. This is a Barcelona superblock. It includes mixed-use communities, multimodal or what are called comfortable streets, street connectivity, subsidized and integrated public transit, and street trees and urban greening. Next slide, please. The sixth attribute is what we call the playable city. The benefits to play for child well-being is well known and evidenced. It fosters physical, social, cognitive, and emotional development. But we argue in the book for an all-age approach to the playable city. Urban design can nurture creativity, learning, self-identity, agency, and social interaction across all ages in a playful capacity, and also offer continued development opportunities for adolescents and adults and seniors. A playable city, we argue, has two main characteristics: pure play context, you can see some of those in the slide, props and context designed specifically for play, playgrounds and play streets. But there are also other playable contexts not designed for play, but in which playful activities take place, such as interactive art exhibits. Your Cloud downtown is a prime example of how we play in the city. We look at it and we see a different type of vision. Our relationship to the city has changed. Also opportunities for play appropriation, such as parkour and free running. Next slide. Okay, the final attribute, and arguably the most important attribute of a restorative city, is the inclusive city. We take a very wide interpretation of inclusive design. It's designed for all age, all gender, all race, all sexual orientation, all socioeconomic strata, and for the full diversity of physical, sensory, and cognitive abilities and needs. Unfortunately, we all know urban design can also contribute to segregation, exclusion, and prejudice in our cities, affecting people's self-esteem, dignity, and independence. Two ways in which a city can achieve more inclusivity, are by attracting people to mixed income, mixed age neighbourhoods, much as in the case of the Barcelona superblock I've just spoken about, offering good quality housing and facilities and making sure urban design decisions recognise the needs and characteristics of all residents. This is Vienna in the slide, which is doing a particularly good job in terms of urban design for all genders, and also addressing its historical injustices head on. This image is of a public street exhibition recognising the significant role of women during the Holocaust. Next slide, please. To sum up, there are four key attributes of a restorative city. Fascination, which includes a sense of wonder and curiosity. Compatibility, which means providing a good fit with your needs. A sense of being away, which creates a sense of escape from the city, and of extent, looking up to the horizon, up and out of your context. If you can do only two things in a neighborhood in Chicago for mental health, my recommendation would be increase its curiosity and fascination, and second, increase opportunities for being away. Last slide, please. This is just an introduction to the book. It's available in August. We do have a discount code for you today, and I think that's going to be given through email at the end of the talk. It's a 35% discount off the paperback price. And thank you very much. I look forward to questions and dialogue in due course.
Jenny, thank you so much. Those aspects, as you very clearly talked about them, I was picturing different areas of the city and areas that I think Chicago does well with that. But hopefully through the course of this conversation, we'll identify areas that we could do better. Thanks for such a great presentation. Just a reminder, we've received several questions so far, but submit your questions through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We'll keep us assembling those, and I'll have a chance to ask them for you after Margaret presents. So next we'll hear from Margaret Frisbie, Executive Director of the Friends of the Chicago River. Friends of the Chicago River is the only organization exclusively dedicated to improving and protecting the Chicago River system. Passionate about protecting and restoring the health and vitality of urban communities for people and wildlife, Frisbie served on Mayor Lori Lightfoot's Environment Transition Team and is on the board of the Friends of the Forest Preserves. Welcome, Margaret.
Dave, thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here, and thank you everyone for coming, and Jenny for that terrific presentation. I think I need to pre-order 25 copies of your book because I know a lot of people that I know need to read it so that it'll help us get our work done. Anyway, as Dave said, I am Margaret Frisbie, the Executive Director of Friends of the Chicago River. And as a Chicagoan for many years, I speak as a resident and a river advocate that a healthy river is good for public health. Slide 2, please. Or slide 1, and then slide 2. So next slide, please. Thank you. So by way of history, Friends of the Chicago River was founded in 1979 as a result of a magazine article written by a man named Robert Cassidy, who was an urban planner. It was the cover story of Chicago Magazine in August that year, and the title was Our Friendless River. It was in the river in those days, there was sewage in it on average every 3 days. It was fenced off and polluted, but Robert Cassidy could see past the river. He could see past the pollution. So he wrote this article that was really a work plan, an urban plan for taking advantage of this wonderful waterway that flows through our city. So after the article was published, people called him up unexpectedly and said, how can we help? And that was the birth of Friends of the Chicago River. So our mission is to improve the Chicago River system for people, plants, and animals. We work through 3 program areas. So education and outreach, which is intended to build awareness in the stewardship ethic, on the ground projects that demonstrate what's possible and improve the health of the river system. And then public policy and planning, and that's the long-term systemic work, the work it takes to really make change forever. And we are really excited about the progress we've made. It can be measured in species of fish, which is up from 7 in the 1970s when we were founded to over 75 today, miles of trail, and people in, on, and along the water. We work to improve water quality. So the water quality, the ambient water quality on a daily basis is hundreds of times better than it used to be. We review river edge development to make sure that it's sustainable and takes the river in mind and public access, wildlife, and water. We have over 27,000 members, volunteers, and online activists, and nearly 100,000 people usually participate in our programs in a typical year, including over 450,000 students who've been part of our Chicago River Schools network since 1996. We do landscape scale restoration, and some really fun statistics from just the last year or last couple of years includes that we've done probably 500 acres of landscape scale restoration in the forest preserves of Cook County, and specifically with turtles in mind. And when you clear the landscape for turtles, you're getting rid of invasive plants, allowing native plants to thrive, and you're also letting turtles nest in safe places where predators don't know where they are. And we have increased turtle nesting success in those areas from 0 to 60%, which is an amazing figure in wildlife restoration. And last year, we actually fledged an osprey pair fledged 2 new chicks from a nesting platform that we installed along Little Calumet River in Bovian Woods. And that osprey pair is back again this year, and we're pretty sure they're sitting on eggs. So those are the kinds of things that we can see that are making a difference. Slide 3, please. So our vision for the Chicago River system was and has been that the Chicago River system would be one of the world's greatest metropolitan rivers. But the fact is, we believe we've actually achieved that vision. And so we've evolved our definition to the river being a blue-green corridor of connected natural open space. The benefits of this are myriad. It protects land and water, it captures stormwater, reduces combined sewer overflows and sewage in the river, it creates public access, recreation and the natural movement of wildlife species, habitat creation and connectivity. And right now we are in the midst of developing a river conservation and recovery plan that will have a wildlife element that's almost complete and should be released this summer, a human component, and a water quality action plan, all of which are meant to come together to change the health of the river and continue this wonderful forward momentum that we have. Slide 4, please. So last year, we launched the Chicago Calumet River Watershed Council, organized around capturing capturing stormwater using nature-based solutions on a watershed scale. And the benefits, again, tie to public health and wellness, much as laid out by Jenny. So we will reduce sewage and litter pollution by doing this, flooding and basement backups, urban heat island effect, the effects of climate change and air pollution, and improving quality of life, scenic beauty, environmental justice, and again, physical health and mental well-being. Next slide, please. That last benefit is at the core of Friends' vision of the Chicago River system is a connected natural open space available to people and wildlife, something that at this time in history is frankly an imperative for both. It's no surprise that a walk along the river is a wonderful way to spend the day. The experience can provide the surprising sight of a great horned owl, and I'm going to pause and stop my video so you can see an owl that I took a photo of this spring at LaBaugh Woods on the northwest side of Chicago. An amazing, amazing representation of improved health. You also see spring ephemerals if you're walking along the river in the woods or our parks, or you just get satisfaction of mud on your boots from being outside. So one of the things we've talked about a lot is the debate of over where and how we spend our public dollars, which often undervalues investment in the environment and our native landscapes, pitting economic growth against environmental health. The basic argument is we can't afford to. Yet a growing body of evidence is providing reasons why we must. Next slide, please. So, previous slide, please. Thank you. So as Jenny described, the benefits of nature provide many things in public health way beyond physical impact of exercise. Over the last 2 decades, hundreds of studies have found a direct relationship between access to nature and good physical and mental health and long-term well-being. Some of these benefits include lower stress and anxiety, reduced instances of type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and high blood pressure. Children do better in school when they have access to nature, lower impacts from ADHD, and improved immune function. A meta-analysis of 140 such studies involving 290 million people from 20 countries that was done by the University of East Anglia confirmed that spending time in or living close to natural green spaces is associated with diverse and significant health benefits, including most of those listed above. Another study from the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, established that nature provides direct attention improvements. And so basically your directed attention, the idea being that nature is full of intriguing stimuli that subtly captures your attention from the bottom up, right? So this is known as attention restoration therapy. And it means being in nature allows top-down directed attention abilities a chance to replenish and rest. And in cities where we live and work, this becomes particularly important because our lives are filled with dramatic stimuli, and living or working here requires constant directed attention. And I would add that certainly the last year of the pandemic, we've had this overlay of even greater stress. So again, people really, really needed nature. So, and further research is finding that blue space, such as rivers, lakes, and streams, provide the same benefits. This movement has become the foundation of wellness clinics and holiday destinations where nature is provided to you. Yet while some people can pay for this privilege, the ideal and ethical option is to create easy access to natural areas for everyone, especially in urban areas within easy distance of home. In fact, an article in the online journal, The Conversation, stated, for natural capital to deliver health benefits to people, it needs to be right next to them, integrated into the everyday fabric of their world. So for the Chicago River system and the people who live and work here, that means understanding the river as a connection and a natural resource, not a water feature. Supporting the protection of the river and adjacent lands financially, telling your elected officials it matters that we need to invest in nature, volunteering and exploring places you haven't seen before. Next slide, please. So again, I'll pause and have everyone just take a moment to look at this slide. These are all places in Chicago, and this is wildlife that lives in Chicago. Those of you who are local will recognize the reflection of a muskrat in the Wrigley building in the main stem, of this fish caught by DNR in the main stem and released, and the snapping turtle, which was found in Albany Park on the North Branch of the Chicago River, frog, again at LaBaugh Woods where the owl lives, and beavers, which have been all over the place. And if you can see my screen, I'm holding up a piece of beaver chew, a log, that was found at Bubbly Creek, one of the most densely urbanized and polluted stretches of the whole entire Chicago River system. So last year, to encourage people to discover the river and find peace and health in the pandemic, with so much time on our hands, instead of being able to do our usual education and outreach programs, we launched a new program called Inside Out and About. There's online programming in English and Spanish, a podcast, and this summer we will promote or organize in-person walking tours, nature tours, stewardship days, and litter cleanups. The podcast so far, it comes out monthly and you can find it on our website and most of the podcast stations, includes interviews with Jeffrey Bear, the award-winning WTTW producer, Pulitzer Prize-winning author Elizabeth Colbert, who's a New Yorker reporter and wrote the book The Sixth Extinction, June Webb, a former Chicago public school teacher who is a restoration steward, James Byrne, a Bridgeport resident who founded the South Branch Park Advisory Council, and Open Lands, who helped establish the African American Heritage Water Trail, which is an absolutely fascinating journey along the Little Calumet River. And I encourage you, when you hang up today or at lunch or this evening, to check it out. It's just an extraordinary grouping of places in history that we should all know all about. So check this out at chicagoriver.org, Friends website. And I encourage you to get outside and visit the river, the parks, and open space along it. And if you do so, you might encounter some of these marvelous creatures. These photos, as I said, were all taken by within the city, and there's more places like this. So our last slide is just to finish up, which is to say, in conclusion, living in the city does not need to be devoid of living in nature, and we need to invest in and restore our natural areas and make them available to everybody. Some of you may be aware of evolutionary ecologist Michael Rosenweig, and he wrote a book called the Win-Win Ecology. And one of the things he talks about is this idea that in order to protect wildlife, we have to concentrate on places beyond Yellowstone or Yosemite, places that people are used to thinking are the Amazon. But we need to protect, that's about 5% of the world is protected, and we need to work on the 95%. So I extrapolate that to say that we need to look where we live in these urban areas and work together to roll up our sleeves and make sure that we're taking care of our natural resources. And we're thinking beyond our own lives, that we're thinking that what's good for wildlife is good for humans too. So with that, I will wrap up my remarks, and I thank you for your time and attention.
That was great, Margaret. And it's a great segue to a question that we've received. So please keep your questions coming through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. To tie the two together, Jenny and Margaret, sensory city, active city, neighborly city, nature plays a big part in this. And Margaret, to some extent, I love your comment at the end there that just because you're in an urban environment doesn't mean that you have to be separated from nature. And to some extent, that wasn't very prevalent in the 40s, 50s, and 60s of urban planning, right? It was to get nature out of the cities where rivers were put underground and pavement was added. So I guess I'm asking the two of you, as our eyes to the world that's beyond Chicago for the attendees, what are some examples of what other cities have done to integrate their residents with nature to really hit the parts of the city, Jenny, that you talked about, the sensory city, the active city? I mean, kayaking down the Chicago River is one of my favorite activities to do. What else is there out there that people could be thinking about with Chicago or their city where they're calling in from?
Do you want me to take this question?
Please.
So it goes back to the 4 attributes I referred you to in my final slide. Fascination, which also includes a sense of curiosity and wonder, a sense of being away, a sense of extent, and a sense of compatibility. So there are pockets of every city that provide some of those elements, I would say. I don't know of any city that doesn't provide some of that. But it's about a joined up system. It's about also raising awareness of those attributes so that designers, planners, public health officials can come together and collaborate and see how they can maximize increasing access to those facilities. So don't have one city to hold up as an exemplar. I think Chicago is a very good city of all of those attributes. I think where I'm speaking from today, Edinburgh, super restorative city, but it's not perfect. No city is. I'll leave it at that.
Sounds great. Margaret, do you have an example?
Yeah, I mean, I just would echo what Jenny said about Chicago, which is that we are fortunate that the forest preserve system of Cook County, the whole forest preserve concept was started here. And so over 100 years ago, our regional leaders decided to protect acres, and we have 70,000 acres of forest preserves along rivers, but also elsewhere. And it's just amazing. And during the pandemic, I have an article somewhere that talks about the statistics, but the use is up by 60, 70% of these forest preserves. And also the Chicago Park District has worked really very hard to increase the natural areas in Chicago. And so they have over 1,000 acres that is in natural area restoration, in addition to the many parks and open spaces meant for active and passive recreation. So I think those are really good examples of government agencies stepping in and choosing to see the value of public land for people. And other government agencies like the Water Reclamation District, which is our sewage and stormwater agency for Cook County, is the second largest landowner in Cook County. And their land is not managed with nature in mind. And that's one of the things that we're striving towards, is to change their philosophy to say that as a public agency, you're managing this land in the public trust, and we have to look at highest and best use.
That's great. There's a statistic that something like 90% of the residents in Chicago live within a half mile of a park, right, or an outdoor space. And that's powerful. That probably helps with the mental wellness of individuals, knowing that they can escape to nature within that close distance. Yeah, Jenny.
I'd say that's really powerful, but one factor is maintenance and quality of that green space.
Yeah.
Right, and that is one of the things that the city of Chicago talks about, that they have, looking at nature-based green infrastructure or green infrastructure overall and all its co-benefits, that they don't have trouble getting funding in order to do the projects, but they do have trouble finding maintenance funds. So that is actually, it's one of the barriers to doing more nature-based work, is figuring out how to maintain it and make sure it still works.
One of the questions we received dealt with an alignment between like number of bike lanes and mental health. So I guess my question to you, Jenny, in your book, or do either of you have a good resource of where data is kept to align similar installations like the number of bike lane miles and mental health, just so that when you're proposing these interventions, that you come with data to help the city and kind of the voters decide that it's worth investing in?
So we have a mountain of data showing the benefits to cycling, to, let's say, cardiovascular disease, to cancer, to obesity. We have a complete shortage of data that shows how it relates to mental health. We know there are relationships between physical activity and mental health, but we desperately need more of that evidence, I would say.
Yeah, go ahead, Margaret.
So I could say that we have done a couple different economic return on investment projects. So first, in partnership with Open Lands, a regional conservation organization I mentioned earlier, with the African American Heritage Water Trail, in 2013, we did an economic return on investment analysis of investing in public open space and clean water infrastructure that found for every dollar spent, we got $1.70 in return. And more recently, with the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, we did a study in 2019 that found this idea of the blue-green corridor of connected open natural space using stormwater infiltration and nature-based solutions. So, you know, plants and trees and permeable pavement and all that. That actually has an economic return on investment of, for every dollar spent, $1.77. So that was actually, the first study was in jobs and increase in property values. And the second one was really based in local wealth. So it wasn't enough, like Jenny has mentioned, environmental gentrification, which is a real risk here. At the same time that we're giving the river back to people because it was fenced off, we have to make sure that we're not taking it away in the same act, right, as we do river edge development. So this shows that river, doing the blue-green corridor increases the value of property, but not enough that it skyrockets, just enough that the local people will spend more money locally. So it's actually an investment in communities.
That's a study that you worked on, or that you?
We did it with the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. It's on our website.
That's great. We'll find a link of that and put it in the post report to send out. That sounds amazing. Because at the end of the day, it's interesting, because Jenny, you had said this, it depends on the quality and the upkeep of those public spaces too, right? So to some extent, if you're increasing land value enough that people begin to activate and use it, that they would have a invested interest then to keep it maintained and to keep it, you know, kind of clean and usable for others. How have you seen successfully, one of the questions we got was, how important is the role of the citizen in creating cities that address mental health? And if so, how can they participate? So one of them would be the obvious, right? To get out and help keep the public spaces clean. But are there other areas that you've seen that's been where citizens have kind of united and focused on improvements to their neighborhoods that really kind of helped mental health?
Well, I would say citizens need to be informed. It's our job as researchers, academics, designers, planners, whoever we are, to inform the public and to make that information easily accessible and a pleasure to engage with. I do think grassroots movements are very powerful, but citizens need help to galvanize themselves and to coordinate their operations. And quite often that just is lacking. So some sort of financial support and some kind of, you know, organizational, administrative support, I think is really, really important.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And certainly there are regionally and in Chicago, the city, a lot of opportunities to engage with organizations like Friends of the Chicago River, Open Lands, the Sierra Club, Friends of the Forest Preserves. I mean, the list is endless. But I think that it's informing people, engaging them, and having them understand that they can make an impact. And that is one of the things that I know we're all trying to do. And recently, you know, with Inside Out and About, the idea is engaging around wellness and understanding the benefits to you as an individual about having natural areas. but also in the ongoing care. So we designed a program with Friends of the Forest Preserves and the Forest Preserves of Cook County called Centennial Volunteers. And the idea is that, that's as a nod to the Forest Preserve Centennial celebration, that people organize as volunteers around places. So they're building community and they become responsible to the place, but they also become responsible to each other. And that builds a system of long-term commitment, and it moves towards advocacy. So I think it's providing a framework where people can be successful and that they feel part of a larger movement.
That's wonderful. And I think a lot of it has to do with awareness too. Like, it wasn't until just a few months ago that I realized that there was a kayak launch just a half mile from my house onto the river, right? And so, or when you're on the bike path along the river and you see people fishing in it, there's an awareness campaign that once you realize it's there, it begins to get prioritized in your life.
Right. Yeah, interestingly, on that note, the Chicago Riverwalk, when that was completed, for the first time, we started getting phone calls at Friends of the Chicago River from the media when there were combined sewer overflows and the Riverwalk flooded. So the Riverwalk was designed to flood. The city knew that would happen, but nobody cared because they didn't understand there was sewage in the river. But suddenly when the Riverwalk was underwater, they cared. So for us, that message of the river having this serious problem, I mean, 85% of those occasions are gone, but it still happens and people need to know it and they need to be told that it's happening and consider it unacceptable.
So one of the questions we received is, historically, cities have been bifurcated or separated by highway construction or major infrastructure projects. And as you look at historically, they tended to isolate low-income or minority communities. And Chicago is not immune to that. It definitely has had that history as well. Chicago is making strides to improve that, but again, maybe a viewpoint from another city or an experience or an observation of Chicago. Is there something we can do to accelerate access to nature and assist with mental health issues in our poorer communities that have long been forgotten from investment that the more affluent communities might have seen?
I'm happy for Margaret to take that, or I can take it.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, happy. I mean, so we've created, I alluded to the Chicago River Watershed Council in one of my slides, the Chicago Calumet River Watershed Council, and the partners of that, actually, the goal is to we're working on a decision support tool that will actually bring together in a layer places where, disinvested communities are, where actually they already have increased flooding and lack of open space, and prioritize those places for stormwater management using nature-based solutions. And the reason the filter is stormwater management is that there's already federal law that drives funding and decision-making umbrella to that. So there's federal law, state law, local ordinances that require stormwater. So that actually we'll look at going forward how we can prioritize those communities that have been cut off, have a lack of public space, and making sure that we use this filter of nature-based solutions so that you get all the benefits for wildlife, for human health, climate resiliency, et cetera, from it.
I would just chip in and flag Paris as an example to look at. So the mayor, female mayor of a city, has won her ticket on the promise of really building a restorative urban centre to Paris. So cutting off traffic, increasing the number of walkable streets, play streets, cycle streets is happening on a huge, huge scale. But also, really truly involving those communities in those types of decisions, and identifying which parts of the cities are priority, because it can't all be done at once. And sometimes it happens in my community here in Edinburgh. The middle class communities are better at leveraging for the improvements than where they're really truly needed, which is in the poorer communities.
A question we received talked a little bit about an anxiety disorder. It relates to urban environments or, kind of more remote paths through the woods. How in today's day and age do you promote access to nature while still focused on safety and security issues that might exist in these natural areas for people that are nervous about acting in kind of more isolated nature areas?
Well, you're hitting on a really interesting point, all right, because we can't assume that all nature is good for all people. And we really need a lot more research showing how women, how children, how people from different ethnicities relate to nature and some of the barriers. So it's not necessarily a cure for all. It is about, I think, safety mechanisms include how you design for nature in the city, the height of planting, keeping views open. Street trees are great because you can still keep your sight lines open. And it's about good lighting, it's about panic alarms, it's about all of those things. And all of us, I think, being involved in street surveillance, we have a responsibility to keep our eyes open, I think. Would be my thoughts.
And I would add that there's also something that we call the Continuum of Engagement, which is providing introductory opportunities. So canoe days where people just are out in a pond or on a river in the forest preserves, and they start to interact, but not maybe going down a trail the first time. Or you start to talk about birds and people get excited about wildlife. So you have introductory ways of introducing people to new spaces. And then slowly you can build comfort and new relationships with places that you haven't been before. And I think there's certainly here, one always needs to be aware of what's going on around you, but we don't have high instances of crime in our forest preserves and local parks. And so it's more of in many cases, it's building a relationship with the place so that you understand it better. So we've been doing the Chicago River School Network field trips for literally decades. And we have Chicago public school students who ask if there's bears, right? They don't know what's in the forest. So you arrive for the first time and like, these are woods. In my mind, they're full of bears, right? And you're like, well, in I think 1889, the last bear was shot in Illinois or shot in Chicago. So it's been a while. But so that's part of it, is teaching, building an understanding that these natural places are places you can visit, and that also they belong to us. There are natural places. They belong to the public, right? So it's your park district, it's your lakefront, it's your forest preserve, and you deserve to be able to go there and enjoy it.
Yeah, there's been interesting news over the last few years as our urban environments have become less dense, the nature has come back into the urban environment. So along the lakefront, there's been many sightings of coyotes.
Yeah.
And the residents sometimes call 911 and assume the coyotes should be just eradicated from that area. In reality, not necessarily, right? Like it's
absolutely not, right? The coyote is beneficial.
Correct. The purpose is to live harmoniously.
Yes.
It's only when the coyote starts to get erratic that you need to do something about it. So as we begin to move towards the last few minutes of our time together, I wanted to give you both the opportunity to add in a question add in a statement that you may think we may not have covered today, as a final statement for the audience. Margaret, I would start with you.
Sure. Well, thank you very much. And again, I really appreciate being part of this conversation. I think livable cities are sustainable cities, which are also wild cities. And that's the future. If we want to have a future, that is our future. At least I firmly believe that. And I would just want to share to the listeners and participants today that the Chicago River system is a wild, wonderful natural resource. And it's hard to tell when you're downtown that it's full of fish, but as I said, over 75 species. It's full of wildlife. There's turtles, there's beavers, there's muskrats, there's otters coming back. It's just extraordinary. And it belongs to all of us. And it's a community connector. And the water is, I think, much cleaner than people realize. And so I just encourage you to get out and experience this river. Maybe this summer you're going to have still some more flexibility where we're in this transitional time, and to pay attention to what else is here and get out and discover it for yourself. I cannot tell you what joy it brings me to participate in this effort and the wonderful people I've met doing it. And I invite everyone to be part of it as well.
That's great. Jenny, how about you?
Oh, thank you. I haven't answered all the questions in the question and answer box. So if people want to email me, I'm really happy. I've got thoughts about homelessness. I've got thoughts about what architects might want to do.
Let's talk about the homeless one then. Why don't you answer that one?
Homelessness. Well, homelessness is a classic example of what I call a complex problem, much like obesity. It really needs a systems perspective. It needs a whole system of policy, design, social care, behavioral attitudes, people's perceptions of homelessness to change. So it's not an isolated and simple issue to solve. We do talk about it in the book a little bit. We talk about the need for cleaning facilities downtown, for water access, for charging stations, for equitable access to Wi-Fi, because we all need Wi-Fi. Particularly people who need to apply for jobs, about shelters downtown, using empty office blocks that are emptying owing to COVID and people walking from home, being converted into new housing for homeless people, but also changing attitudes and really understanding better the context of homelessness. So yeah, I've got many more things to say, but we've run out of time. So please engage with me via email if you've got other questions, and we'll be sending out a discount code for the book, I think. Is that right? To those people who've attended. Thank you.
Yeah. Jenny, what would be the one thing that, as you wrote that book, that when a person reaches the last page of the book that you wish that they then go and do?
Oh my gosh, that's an interesting question. Well, I think being informed, I think being informed is critical, and I think working collaboratively together is critical. So those are the two things I'd want them to do. Pass the book on so somebody else gets informed, and then be collaborative in how we accelerate urban design for mental health.
That's great. That's a great summary too. And so as I just wrap up our time, you know, when March 13th, 2020 came, corporations and businesses flipped a switch that sent their employees home for what was expected to be a few weeks. As the weeks turned into months, months into a year, really a new normal was established. Families ate dinner together again. Commutes were replaced with masked walks around the neighborhoods, and while frontline workers still commuted to their job, they enjoyed less traffic and crowded on public transportation, as our downtowns are occupied by a fraction of the pre-pandemic population. The world adapted and society moved on. To think that the same switch can be flipped back on and overnight to welcome workers back to their cubicles and train cars is a miscalculation in human behavior, as we've begun to touch on today. So not only have we adapted, we've created a new norm, and businesses and cities are caught in the middle of wanting pre-pandemic activity to return, but facing a reckoning that there are aspects of a new normal that are better than before. We've discovered the river system. We've discovered our neighborhoods. We've discovered our neighbors. And we've realized that we don't need to take a plane ride for a 45-minute meeting across the country. We don't need to sit in a car for a commute into the office to have focus time. We're beginning to see that work environments are shifting, and we need to provide a compelling reason for our employees to come together. And if focus work can be done at home, as we've proven over the last year, maybe it's the meeting and social work that happens in the office. And if this logic follows to our city centers, downtown business districts are transitioning from suit and tie formal work environments into downtown social districts. And I must say that with the river, Millennium Park, the world-class museum, Chicago is well poised to make this transition, and probably better than many other cities across the globe. Another aspect of easing people back downtown is allowing people to come back to their city on their own time, at their own pace, and with their own distancing. So starting this July, the Chicago Loop Alliance has pioneered Sundays on State Street, where from July to September, State Street will be closed to traffic, allowing restaurants to come onto the street, artists to create in front of us, universities to welcome their students back in the fall, and families to gather and play together in the Central Social District. As a worker, this will afford me the chance to come on to the first Sunday, come downtown and look up at my office. The second Sunday, come back and maybe go into my office, easing ourselves back into our pre-pandemic existence and falling back in love with our city of Chicago. I'd like to thank our panelists for sharing their insight today, for leading a fascinating and timely discussion. and for the Chicago Loop Alliance for organizing this event, Springboard for their support, and for all of you attended today. Our next Downtown Future series will take place in August, and we'll continue to explore more ways that the Loop can be built back from the COVID-19 pandemic stronger than ever before. Stay tuned for more information.